Hello, and welcome to Ask Dr. Dawn. The opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers, and this is a program intended for education and entertainment. It should not be construed as a substitute for a medical consultation. Last week, I spent a lot of time talking about market failures and the myths of the free market and how they didn't apply to healthcare. This week, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the market, and maybe we could think of this as one place where competition does work, at least to bring back down prices, but it also creates a lot of waste. But I guess that's kind of what capitalism does. So we're going to talk about Novo Nordisk's products Ozempic and Wegovy, and Eli Lilly's products Mounjaro and Zepbound. And the battle between semaglutide and tirzepatide continues, but they're both making a lot of money. In fact, recently Lilly was the first pharmaceutical company to pass $1 trillion in value. So what has made this particular market function differently? Well, for one thing, just like our waistbands have all become elastic, this is one where demand is elastic and very price-driven, and pricing has been very transparent and largely not covered by insurance for people who want to use it to lose weight. So there's a large market of people who are in the market to lose weight. Ask any publisher, they will tell you that they always want diet books because they can always sell diet books. Nobody can have enough. It's just like me in textbooks, actually, because you buy the book with the hope that you will actually gain the knowledge or the weight loss that's contained within the book. And it's true, though. I definitely look at books that I bought last year and say, I meant to read that. As the new book comes through the door that I now mean to read. I'm sure I'm not alone in that particular acquisition vice, but it's definitely not just books for some people. Anyway, diet books. And other things that have really made this work like a real market are compounding pharmacies and the ability to buy abroad. Now, you might find yourself buying a counterfeit drug, but these particular drugs aren't particularly dangerous if somebody gets the molecule wrong. And so if you buy it from the Indian pharmacy and you don't get as much of a benefit, or don't get any benefit, well, then you probably go to the compounding pharmacy or even shell out to the recent thing that I have not seen pharmaceutical companies do before, which is set up their own direct-to-consumer websites to sell the drug at a discounted cash price. And the discount's really close to 50%, at least 40% off of what they were charging back in January. So the prices have come down pretty quickly. It's still $500 a month, so it's not nothing. But the main challenge to further growth to Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, can I just call you Eli? Mr. Lilly? I'll just call you Eli and Novo for the rest of this talk. Anyway, their big challenge is the needles. It's only a once-a-week shot, but there's a lot of people who just don't like the concept of stabbing themselves with a needle, even a tiny, eeny-weeny needle. Another disadvantage is refrigeration, so the stuff goes bad if you leave it out on the counter. And so what's happening now is oral GLP-1 drugs. And a paper came out in New England Journal, I guess back in September. And these drugs don't work quite as well, but we're probably going to get Novo's Wegovy pill, which is semaglutide. The decision is before the FDA as we speak, so it could launch in early 2026. And Eli has got another pill. They're casting it as more convenient because you don't have restrictions on eating and drinking. Both of these companies struck deals with the Trump administration earlier last month, that would be in November, to offer certain medications at a discount in exchange for access to Medicare. And that would include the semaglutide and the tirzepatide, which are the two agents. And their new pills would be offered at a dose directly to consumers for $150 a month. See how that market price is bidding down rather rapidly? But of course, again, competition. We've got to come up with some new things. So some of that money that Eli's making, he's throwing into new drugs. This one is one that has 3 different hormones in it. It's retatrutide, and people who took the highest dose of this drug lost 24% of their body weight in 48 weeks. That's an awful lot. The lead author of that paper that demonstrated that research was Ania Jastreboff, the director of the Yale Obesity Research Center. She was the lead author of that paper, and she's now co-writing a book with Oprah Winfrey, a forthcoming book on obesity, sure to be yet another market success. The demand for books and the market for books being one of those things that does come a little closer to actually working in a free market. So Eli is waiting for the results of multiple clinical trials. They should be done by next year, around this time next year. One of the big risks if you lose 24% of your body weight in less than a year is how much of that is muscle, and how old are you, and will you be able to get that muscle back? If you are over 60, you do not want to lose weight rapidly because you will lose a lot of muscle, and your ability to rebuild muscle after the age of 60 is severely limited. I don't know if that's Mother Nature at work or what's going on. There's also a new drug from Novo that is called Cardrisema, and it combines semaglutide with a compound that mimics another gut hormone called amylin. We've been trying to find something that would act on amylin for quite a while. They finally found the magic molecule. It's taken about 20 years. This appears to cause less loss of lean muscle and fewer stomach-related side effects. And Pfizer actually beat out Novo in a bidding war in November to pay $10 billion for a biotech called Metsura, whose leading weight loss product has a once monthly dose. That is a gamble because that thing has some rather significant side effects in trial data, but, get them while they're hot, right? So it raises the question, how much have people spent on these drugs? Well, $25 billion for Eli this year, $23.5 billion this year, or rather the first 9 months of 2025. And these drugs will be around for a while, and each one of the subsequent spin-offs has to go through validation to get the FDA indication. So you may get it for weight loss, but if you want to go after cardiovascular disease, like Eli just did, or you want to go after sleep apnea, like Nova just did, then you're going to have to do those trials and prove that those drugs work for that. So, as I've said, a combination of market competition and maybe a little bit of government policy with the Medicare thing is starting to bring down prices. And so the old standards, semaglutide and tirzepatide, are going to be around for a while. And who knows what's rolling down the chute next. But I think that we will not see the end of this, as the drugs have been. We mentioned sleep apnea and cardiovascular disease. There's also evidence of possibly reduction in cancer. Of course, is that just losing the weight? Good question. Do you care if you lower your risk of cancer and fit into a smaller size pants? I think it's a win-win. A quick little tip for you if you are struggling with fiber, which we've been beating the fiber drum for a while, and lately it's made it into mainstream media in a major way. So I've just picked up this trick in an article that I read. This was from the Washington Post, which my husband shoots me articles from this. This one I actually agree with, often don't agree with this extremely conservative anti-supplement person. But she gave me an idea, which I wanted to pass on to you, which is go ahead and put your psyllium in your morning coffee. Don't just buy the plain unflavored. Don't get the fruit flavored, which often has some kind of artificial sweetener in it. Instead, just get the plain one and stir it into your morning coffee. It'll make your coffee have a little bit different texture, maybe a little bit more of a jelly-like or grittier consistency. But I'm not fussy about that first cup of morning coffee. It can have been sitting on the back of the stove for a couple of days. It's a drug. It's not there for pleasure. It's there for immediate effect. Even when I get enough sleep, I really love that wake up of sitting and having a cup of coffee in the morning while I sit next to a bright, big window so I get morning light so that I will fall asleep that night. It takes about 10 grams, that's 2 teaspoons, of fiber to make a substantial difference. But the advantages of psyllium are that it is a good fiber. It does feed the microbiome. It turns into a particular compound that is essentially a prebiotic. So it has substantial benefit. And there's lots of data about cardiovascular health and glucose tolerance and reduction in cancer and improvement of the microbiome. So, yeah, it's hard to beat. Now, advice on the coffee, start with a half a teaspoon. Do that for a few days. Get a little used to the texture change. Go up to a teaspoon. Do that for a week. Then go to 2 teaspoons. And I mean real teaspoons, not like the ones you stir your coffee with. Those have more than a teaspoon of content. So use the cooking ones and work your way up. By the time you've done it a few times, you'll be able to just kind of eyeball it. But stir that in there. If you go too fast and you'd go straight to the 2 teaspoons, you will probably be levitating from the gas that you create. So I don't advise that strategy. Well, we've got an email here, and this is from a frequent contributor, Lloyd Kelsey, often sends me articles. Lloyd writes, hey, here's another one. Thought your audience might be interested in this. You often talk about cancer, but I've never heard you talk about this. And indeed, Lloyd, thank you, because I had not heard about this particular thing, and it really kind of explains something that's intrigued me for a long time. Cancers are known to mutate rapidly, which can lead to treatment resistance in a similar way to the way that bacteria become antibiotic resistant with recurrent exposure. But cancer cells are eukaryotic cells. They're not bacteria. So they're cells with nuclei, and in the nuclei are chromosomes, which are relatively protected from mutation and have a slower mutation rate. So should not mutate rapidly, and yet the mutation rate in cancers is very fast. And I've been scratching my head about this for a long time, because it's like when you observe things and they would seem to be contradictory and you don't understand why they're not, it's perplexing, but you kind of just put it on the shelf and trust that some scientist somewhere along the way will figure it out. Well, UC San Diego scientists have solved this mystery. The results were published recently in Science, and the answer is something called Chromothripsis. Chromothripsis is just one of several mechanisms that cancer cells use to evolve and resist therapy. Instead of accumulating mutations gradually, Chromothripsis can generate dozens to hundreds of genomic alterations in a single catastrophic event, accelerating cancer evolution dramatically. It's also remarkably common. Maybe 1 in 4 human cancer types show evidence of Chromothripsis. And for some tumors, the rates is even higher, like all of the cells have got it. For example, all osteosarcomas, an aggressive bone cancer, display this, and many brain cancers show unusually high levels as well. It's important to emphasize that these cancers are among the most difficult to treat, and now we know why. But what happens in Chromothripsis is that the chromosome literally explodes. It's because of an enzyme that breaks down the DNA in a chromosome rapidly, and the enzyme was basically inferred, but it has now been discovered. That's why this is important, because you'd have to know which molecule you're after and figure out how to stop it, since we can now build antibodies against just about everything, and we are developing all these new nanoparticles and targeted therapies to get things into cancer. This is happening at exactly the right time. The enzyme called N4BP2 it's capable of breaking the chromosomal DNA apart. It actually causes Chromothripsis, and when that happens, you get a chromosome reduced to shattered chromosome fragments, which then reconstruct themselves, put themselves back together in the wrong way. It's like the spark in a kitchen full of natural gas that sets off the explosion. It's remarkable what happens, because when Chromothripsis occurs, the cancers have all of the broken fragments don't come back into the new chromosome. And so you end up with circular DNA fragments that tend to carry cancer-promoting genes. So this is remarkably similar to what happens to bacteria when they trade DNA, even across species, bacteria will do this, that contain genes for antibiotic resistance. But we're seeing that the cancers is effectively, it's almost as if there's a process to go searching for the DNA that you would want to send to other cells so that they could also develop cancer. Our next story is related, or our next topic, I should say, because it's not a story, it's actually science, is related to research that began 10 years ago, but did not come to my attention until recently when I was looking at the references on an article, and I came across this reference that was from 2013, and the title kind of blew my mind, Use of Corticosteroids and Risk of Venous Thromboembolism, a nationwide population-based case control study. So the research, and I thought, well, has the research backed this up? And the answer is yes. Any kind of glucocorticoid use significantly increases the risk of venous thromboembolism. And it's new or recent use that poses the higher danger, although there is evidence for a causal link. And some studies have found rates at 300% or threefold in people during the first month that they start on steroids. And a higher risk for both first-time clots and recurrent clots. So that means that we need to be, if you have had a venous thromboembolism or a pulmonary embolism, you need to hear me now. You would want to really think twice before using a steroid unless it was absolutely necessary. And it can be absolutely necessary. If you've got a terrible asthma attack and you are looking at ventilator versus IV steroids, go with the IV steroids. But a light case of poison oak, just in case management for a case of shingles, well, no, probably not. You're going to want the doctor to really justify the use of anything except topical steroids. So inhaled steroids actually do cause a problem, as well as oral or intravenous. And as you might expect, inhaled is less than oral is less than intravenous. But I have not seen this as a black box warning coming out on steroids. And at a threefold risk, like I said, I really did not know this, and I feel like I should have known it, and I blame the system for not bringing it to my attention, because this is a substantial factor in the decision whether to use these really, really widely used drugs. Now, somebody might call in or think of calling in, so I would love to hear from you, but I will anticipate the obvious question, what about steroid injections in a joint? And the answer is probably somewhere in there with the inhaled steroids, because we have enzymes in our tissues that have a tendency to break things down before they get in our bloodstream. And that's true for steroids that are taken into the lungs. And it's also true for joint injections. Some does get through into the bloodstream, but that's why I'm placing the risk as intermediate between oral and then I do want to say this was the first study, the one back in 2013. I have the most detail on this one. And this was basically looking at what the reason for this was. It was a study of the Danish Registry of Patients. And the fun thing about that is you've got a name and a number and all the drugs this person has ever taken, when they use them, and what diagnosis they've had. It's a treasure trove of information that would be much richer if they had more brown and black people in Denmark. Not to say they don't have any, but it's largely a Caucasian population. So the problem with data like that is that you don't know how that's going to translate to a different group. Nevertheless, the threefold increased risk in oral users of oral corticosteroids that one study found is really scary. And so we don't know about contributing factors, but I just want to put it out there. You need a good reason to be taking steroids, and not a cosmetic and not convenience, and not because, well, it might help, but solid data because you're taking a risk. And I was not able to find studies looking at, okay, does it make sense to give some kind of blood thinner? Probably not, because the risk is, absolutely speaking, probably low enough that the risk of the blood thinner would be greater than the risk from the steroid. But still, what could you do? Well, kicking up the fish oil is always a good idea. Maybe a baby aspirin won't hurt, might help. Take it with food. And just want that information out there. We're going to move to a couple of short segments on nutrition over the next half hour. So this is aimed at older people who are looking to maintain their muscle mass. Recent research has actually shown that there is a small but statistically significant benefit to using creatine. And I had not seen any studies looking at this, so I found the article quite interesting. Creatine is often taken by younger bodybuilders, but the evidence for elders was kind of thin. This paper was authored by Phil Chilibeck, who's a professor of kinesiology at the University of Saskatchewan. And I'll tell you more about that study in a moment. It was a meta-analysis of 20 randomized controlled trials. So meta-analysis means you take a bunch of trials that did things in more or less the same way, and you add up all of the people in them, because a lot of times there's quite a bit of variation within any random group that you choose, and of course we're trying to randomize these to make the two groups the same, so it's by definition a random group. And there's going to be a lot of variety in there. If there's a lot of variety, you can think of that as noise. And so we end up in science with a signal-to-noise ratio problem. Too much noise and we can't make out the signal, the benefit. So our statistics are helped by this concept of meta-analysis, where you pool groups of randomized individuals, smaller studies, because it gets expensive to do a big study, And then you try to look at whatever your intervention is. In this case, it was creatine. And the creatine was given daily, and this was a style where you had adults who took between the ages of 48 to 84, and they lifted weight 2 or 3 times a week. They gained lean mass and strength, but those who took a placebo and did the same strength training did not gain nearly as much lean mass and strength. So it proves that the creatine is helpful, and it also shows what the correct dose is. But it showed one more thing, which is don't bother if you're not going to do the exercise, because you're not going to get any benefit, and you're just, as many vitamin skeptics say, you're just going to make expensive urine. Now, another thing, if you decide to take creatine, and by the way, the dose on this is somewhere around 2,000 milligrams, you will throw off one of the tests that your doctor uses to measure kidney function, creatinine, which is a byproduct of creatine. So if you are eating a lot of protein or you have greater muscle mass, and I had this happen with a patient just the other day, he has 7% body fat, and his creatine came out at about 1.4, which would be making me worry about kidney function. So if you're a bodybuilder or you're very, very lean, you're going to have a higher proportion of muscle, and that's going to make it look like your kidneys are problematic. You want to ask your doctor to order a cystatin C test. If you're taking a creatine supplement, that'll be a much better indicator of your renal health. Now, who benefits? Well, older people, of course. Vegans tend to benefit the most from creatine supplements because they don't consume much meat or fish. And there's some thoughts that maybe this might have some brain benefits, but it's worth looking at that and saying, yeah, maybe that's just increased fuel, because it's easy for the body to turn creatine into glucose. That's true for any excess amino acid, by the way. So I recommend starting at about 2 grams and working up to 5 grams. Start low, and if you might find that you'll get bloating otherwise. The same thing as what I said earlier for the psyllium. You're asking your body to process a lot of something it hasn't been having to process, and so you want to give it time to, a week or so, work your way up to give it the signal that, oh, hello, you need to turn on the DNA that helps you deal with this because you're going to be getting a lot more of it. So let's talk about mammograms, because a new study in JAMA suggested that risk-based breast cancer screening would be a more effective approach than annual mammograms. And part of what they were saying in the study was cost-effective, that we're doing too many mammograms, that annual mammograms don't need to be done for low-risk individuals, and that maybe they aren't even enough for high-risk individuals. So this study that was published in JAMA was the first randomized clinical trial to assess the impact of a risk-based screening approach. My advice, before we go into why, but I will go into why, is to stick to annual mammograms, because this study is very weak. It's fatally flawed because, well, humans, especially wild-type humans in their natural habitat, have real trouble following instructions consistently for years without messing up. And you need that, really, really badly need that, to do good quality science. Our science on mice is much better because, we keep them in cages and we control what they eat. So the first problem is wild-type humans. Actually, problem number 1 with this study, I should say, is that in the high-risk group, they offered risk-reducing medications to the women. These are chemopreventative drugs, And the use for those in the women who were told, okay, you're high risk, you have dense breasts, you have a family history, you have certain genetics, you're high risk. So they put the women, or offered to the women, these chemopreventative drugs. And these are things like tamoxifen and Clymera, an aromatase inhibitor that completely blocks the formation of estrogen, which is a growth hormone for the breast. So some of these women weren't just getting mammograms, they were actually getting drugs that would reduce their risk of breast cancer. Second problem with this study is that the demographics were mostly white college-educated women. And that is a real problem with breast cancer. There are differences in tumor biology from person to person, and black women statistically are twice as likely to be diagnosed with the most aggressive form of breast cancer, and they have a 40% higher mortality. There's also not just family history, it's breast density, it's tumor biology, which we aren't really able to look at. So, problem number 3. Again, wild-type humans. The data on how often study participants adhered to the suggested mammogram schedule. So for high-risk groups and low-risk groups, adherence was pretty poor. They didn't do what the doctors told them to do. The group that were told that they needed to get fewer mammograms probably were used to getting them annually, and they got them more annually, and they got them more often anyway than they were told to. And those who were told that they needed to go in more frequently for screening didn't. And so the rates of mammograms between the two groups wasn't very different. So you don't really have anything resembling science here. What was the conclusion of the study? Well, the risk stratified mammogram advice was non-inferior, meaning that you didn't, in the risk stratified group, you didn't see fewer cancers. But as I've pointed out, they didn't change their behaviors enough for you to see that, even if there was, in fact, a difference. And by offering the risk group a drug that wasn't offered to the low-risk group, you basically stepped on your study completely in the logic of it in the first place. So that's one I would give like a D- to and say, better luck next time, and let's not depart from the annual mammogram schedule. Let's do, in women who have risk factors, think about getting mammograms and then MRIs every other year. I've been a big proponent of having MRIs be a social resource. Imagine, let's see, California, we're almost a country. So let's imagine that the state of California bought and staffed 3 breast MRI centers, one in Southern California, one in Northern California, one in Eastern California, where it's just tougher to get anywhere, and offered low-cost or no-cost MRIs to women who were high risk, who had dense breasts, who had strong family histories, or other factors that made mammogram a less sure thing. And let's just give them an appointment. Let's just not make it part of the capitalist system. It's just, you can go to you have to drive or catch a bus, but you can make the appointment, you can get there, you can get your MRI, you can make sure you don't have breast cancer, and then you can go home and you could do it again next year. And it would work. You'd have to, I'm not sure about the scale. I'd have to run the numbers. Maybe you'd need 5 or 6 or even 10 MRIs. But the amount of money you would save on the cancers that you diagnosed would probably justify it. Plus, that's a capital investment. You don't necessarily have to have it pay for itself if you're paying for it with our tax dollars at work. It can just be, that's a good idea, let's do it. And, who would be hurt? Well, commercial mammogram places, somewhat, but they've got plenty of other things they can take pictures of. So I don't think it would exactly drive them out of business. So while we're on the subject of bad research, let's talk about the Eat Lancet report, which just came up. This is a new report that outlines the best diet for people, as if you can have a general thing. It's looking at red meat. It comes down really hard on red meat, saying it's not essential. It's linear related to higher total mortality and risks of other health outcomes in populations that have consumed it for many years. So the optimal intake may be 0. The problem is there's a problem with correlation versus causation. So if you look at this report, which is based purely on observational data, in other words, people fill in a questionnaire, they say how much meat do they eat, and in study after study, people who report eating a lot of meat have worse health outcomes than people who eat just a little. They have increased risks of heart disease, increased risk of certain cancers, and increased risks of all-cause mortality. But the trouble with blaming it on the red meat is that people who eat red meat or eat a lot of red meat are really different from people in the bottom fifth of red meat consumption. They weigh more. They're more likely to smoke. They're not as well educated. They get less exercise, and they report lower intakes of fruit, vegetables, and fiber. So we're looking at markers for a lifestyle that's not particularly health conscious. So there's lots of other potential causes, and there are things you can't correct for, like sleep quality, depression, and screen time, all of which correlate with the same diseases that meat correlates with, but most of these studies didn't look at that. Also, people who eat more meat are more likely to die of cancer and heart disease, but they're also more likely to die in accidents. So is eating red meat a marker for a certain risk-taking phenotypic lifestyle? Maybe a little bit. Certainly, this study doesn't rule it out. And I'm sure that there are differences between the volume of meat that people eat. And in a perfect world, we could do the science. We could get a large group of people, and we should keep them under surveillance, possibly in a camp of some kind or a model city for, 30 years, feed half of the meat, and see what happens with the cardiovascular risk. Make sure they all have the same exercise patterns and re-randomize them if they don't. We don't have good markers for this, and there are some proposed markers like TMAO, but they aren't really established. So I think the trimethylamine N oxide, which you'll hear about if you read the alternative health literature, it's higher in meat eaters, it's lower in vegans. Absolutely true. It's pro-inflammatory. Absolutely true. But think about this. Starch is pro-inflammatory. So if you're eating red meat instead of instant ramen, it might actually be an improvement. If you're cutting back on your lentils to eat red meat, maybe it's not such a big deal. I think the red meat, oh my God, no red meat is a ridiculous statement. I think a balanced diet with limited amounts is a good strategy, and I'd like to see more of that and less of these epidemiology-based blanket statements that lack nuance. All right, so winding up the hour, we're going to talk about Dr. Oz, and we're going to go through and we're going to do this on a points basis. And I think you may be surprised with the results, but just a spoiler alert. Dr. Oz is not stupid, and maybe the best Trump pick we've seen, at least in any category that I have the ability to analyze or have a decision about. And I want to emphasize, I was not a great watcher of Dr. Oz. I never even watched one of his shows cover to cover. I saw him prance in once and do some audience thing. He reminded me more of a game show host, Let's Make a Deal guy, more than any physicians I was familiar with at the time. But, it was clear that he was a good marketer and an entertainer. But he really was a doctor. He was a heart surgeon before he became a TV host. And on the plus side, he does know medicine and he does know science. And on the negative side, he doesn't really have any experience in health policy or economics, and his job right now is running Medicare and Medicaid, which, well, let's just say that he didn't have what he had on his CV was a large public following. What he didn't have was experience at doing anything like the job that he was hired to do. But that's a minus. So that's -1. Let's keep score. Let me get a pen. Okay. So -1, no experience at the job he's supposed to do. But while he had that show, besides talking about green coffee bean, he did tell people that they should control their health through diet and exercise. He explained how poor gut health and chronic inflammation cause disease. And he urged viewers to stop eating processed food and promoted bone broth and Greek yogurt. So I'm going to give him a +2 on content there, because that was lots of things, and I agree with all of them. Because he's a star, because he's a big media connection, because of Trump's television connection, they're known quantities to each other. But Oz has a medical and a business degree, both, from the University of Penn, and he thinks of himself as a policy wonk. And here's the thing. Like any medical student that ever made it through medical school, he knows how to study. So as soon as he learned he would be nominated for the post, and, that after that, it's like, okay, I'm going to get it because we've got a majority in the Senate and the House. So he actually started studying. He put together a health policy Bible for himself. He called, and we have this from the people he called. He called the last 4 CMS directors, and he talked to them about how the agency works. He called them many times. He surrounded himself with deeply experienced senior staff. He showed some administrative and managerial skills in terms of how he handled the infighting. He's actually made some changes that I agree with. He finalized a Medicare payment rule in October that's aimed at nudging doctors away from surgeries and toward prevention. I haven't looked at the exact text of that, so I don't know if I think it'll work. But, I have to give him a +1 for someone with minimal administrative experience. He seems to be administrating. And he's gotten from a Democratic leader on this is Richard Neal. He's the Democratic leader on the committee overseeing health agencies. And he said about Oz, he's a real scientist and a real doctor. He's not radical. Actual science-based. I like that. Okay, so more praise. I have to give him a +1. Now, there is the problem of financial. Now, he's a very rich man, somewhere between 100 and 300 million, and he had a lot of financial ties with health insurers, pharma companies, and he's profited from those. He did put all of his, he did recuse himself from decisions relating a device that he had been an advisor for that came before the CMS for approval. He did put all of his, he divested of all his healthcare holdings, so there's nothing left in my portfolio, he says. He also transferred his holdings in one company that he co-owns with his son to a blind trust. Okay, I'm going to give him a -1/2 there, I think, because he is making the effort not to actually look like he's recusing himself and getting rid of conflicts of interest. He's actually doing something that apparently you no longer need to do in America for the first time in ever. But yeah, you can't really I give him a -1/2 because he still held on to a certain blind trust interest. You still know what's going on. You still know you have money in that company. He's been doing some tech stuff that looks pretty sophisticated. He's talking about a new CMS app, basically a phone app for Medicaid beneficiaries so that they can report to states the hours they worked, volunteered, or attended school to qualify for Medicaid, because that's a requirement for Medicaid, is you either be looking for a job, working, or volunteering, or being in school. And he did something I really do approve of, which is that he announced in July that CMS would partner with Google and other tech companies to create, quote, a digital health ecosystem. I seem to recall, not an hour ago, I was pointing out how nice it is to have a health ecosystem that allows you to share health information and drug information, and how I envy Denmark and Norway and all the other countries that built that on paper back in the 1940s and moved it to computers as that technology came online. I have to give him a +1 for that, but I'm going to take it right away because he's basically okay with shutting down the subsidies. Millions of Americans will have to pay hundreds or thousands more for monthly premiums after these subsidies expire. And his excuse was, well, these were always meant to be temporary and that they prompted more fraud in the marketplace. Yeah, I know there's like a Somali group that took advantage of COVID funds and stole a lot of money. The fact that something prompted more fraud has to be weighed against the fact that it saved a bunch of lives. So yeah, you're going to have bad actors, and it's on you to keep them from stealing from you, not help the sick and the poor because somebody might cheat, but figure out a way to catch the cheaters early and prevent them from stealing too much. So we're going to give him a -1 on that. All right, let's see. We're coming close to grading day. Let's talk vaccines. Dr. Oz told his viewers to get the coronavirus shots. CMS hasn't pulled back on vaccines at all. Trump claimed a link between Tylenol and autism a few months back. Oz went on the air and said pregnant women should take Tylenol if they have a fever, and that Tylenol was the best option for fighting fevers during pregnancy. So, yeah, he gets a point for that. So let's add up our score. We've got 3, 4, 5, 6 pluses and 2.5 minuses. So 2.5 minus, leaving a net score of 3.5, which is the only positive score I've been able to give to anyone I know anything about right now in healthcare administration. So maybe Dr. Oz is admittedly it's a low bar, but I think he is coming in with fairly high marks. Well, that's about all for this week's podcast. Please go to AskDrDawn.com for news about our future plans. For now, this is Dr. Dawn saying so long and stay healthy.
Ask Dr. Dawn is brought to you by Jiva Media. Production and editing by Charles Bansky. Music by John Scoville.